Hello, my name is Erin Steinhauer. I am 53 years old. I am Vietnamese American. I came to this country in 1979 when I was 9 years old. We moved to a town called Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is a small town in Pennsylvania that's known for being Amish. The Amish people, like the Vietnamese people, were also foreigners who came to that little town many years before us. So we were all refugees in a sense, living together, feeling like outcasts in a small town that remained to this day a very small, a small city in such a big country. And I came over with my family. My mother had 12 children, 6 boys and 6 girls. After the end of the war in 1975, we came to the US in different groups. So the first group were my eldest brother and sister. They were only teenagers at that time, 15 and 16. They went on a big ship with my aunt and uncle. And then later, all the trips later on were, we were all boat people. My mother divided us into 3 groups after that, and we just fled by sea. And the reason why she divided us into 3 groups was because it was so dangerous at the time for all of us to get on the same boat in fear of either not making it because of the ocean being so dangerous, but also because at that time there were many Thai pirates that were really feeding on the refugees at that time. They would capture the boats, they would take everything that you own, they would kill people, they would take women into prostitution. The atrocities were so great that my mother divided us into different groups. My father did not go with us because he was working in the Southern military at that time during the war and was captured and went to re-education camp. And then after that, he felt that him coming with us would have been too dangerous because at that time he was followed quite a bit. The government was fearful that he would try to escape, so he was followed. So he didn't want to come with us because he was concerned that we would be captured as well. So we went into 3 different groups after 1975. So a group in 1977, which was my eldest brother, my second eldest brother, Anh Hoa, with his, and my younger brother, Quynh. Quynh was only 3 or 4 years old, and Anh Hoa was maybe 15 years old. So can you imagine being a parent sending your teenage son with your 4-year-old son to escape by ocean? It was quite a brave and courageous decision by my mother to do that. They landed on an island in Malaysia where really nothing was set up for the refugees. It was just an island that is almost deserted. So my brothers didn't have anything to eat. They didn't have any place to really live. And so they found a temple where they slept, but also they were able to get food that people brought to the temple as offerings, and that's what they ate for a few years before they were able to relocate to America. And then in 1978, my aunt left and my mother sent some of her children to go along with her So, and we and Thận, Hop, so 3 more kids went with them. They made it after a long journey, also by boat, and ended up in Thailand and then came to America. I was part of the last group that went with my mother. So it was me, my older sibling, Chị Hưng, Chị Mai, and then my sister Chị Thu, and my youngest brother Thọ. We went and we were in the boat for 3 days, 4 nights. 3 nights, 4 days, and ended up in Singapore. But that trip was really so memorable for me. I was 9 years old, and I remember it very clearly, where we were on a small wooden boat that really was too small for 200 people. So we were crouched together. We couldn't even lay down because there wasn't enough room. And then we realized after we left the border that we didn't have a compass, so we were just going straight out into the Pacific Ocean. There was no food after the second day, no water after the second day. So we were at the mercy of the ocean and of anyone who could come and save us. I remember vividly seeing a child that was blown over into the ocean. There were a lot of crying and a lot of praying at the same time. And, you know, my mother was trying to be brave for us, and she just kept all of her children, you know, positive and trying to help us not to be distraught. So she was trying to be brave and just telling us stories and calming us down, even though I'm sure inside she was freaking out herself and being very afraid because, you know, we escaped during the night, and that evening people were saying that the boat had a leak in it, so water was actually starting to come through the boat. So the people had to take turns to use buckets to get water out of the boat. By the 4th day, we started to lose hope, especially when we saw that a storm was coming. So people were crying louder and praying louder. I remember seeing the waves that were as high as a 10-story building. And when you're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, you feel so small, like a little speck in the vast universe. And especially when the waves are just pushing you up and down like a yo-yo, you're feeling like you are just a piece of dust that could disappear into history at any moment in time. So I lay there and I look at a big white cross that is right there on the ship, and for the first time I prayed. I went to Catholic boarding school as a kid, but I never believed really in God. But then at that moment, I started to pray and ask for God to save us. After a while, a big ship came and saved us. It's a oil tanker from Norway. It's called Brimminger, and it came to our little boat, and the people threw big ladders, rope ladders down, and big Norwegian men. They look like big white Vikings. They came down and they grabbed us and they helped us to go up on the ship. And after about 1 hour, we were all on the ship and we looked down at our tiny boat, and the storm had come and we saw our boat sink into the ocean. So we knew at that moment that we were saved just in time. Otherwise, we would all be on the bottom of the sea. We were so grateful. We were so grateful, and the ship captain and the sailors, they were so kind to us. They gave us rice. They gave us food. I remember the rice was still half cooked because they didn't really know how to cook rice the way we do. So I remember that, and I remember just the gentleness of the people to really want to help us. We will always remember and will always be grateful to the captains and the crew of the Brimminger and the people of Norway. They took us to Singapore where, as refugees, there was a camp that was set up for us. And the refugees camp there was considered one of the best in all of Asia. So we felt very fortunate because the Singaporean government was so incredibly generous to give us a place in the northern part of the island called Sembarang to help us sort of stay there while we had our papers processed to go to resettle into our permanent country. So we were there for 3 months. I was seeing that as kind of a camping paradise. It was so much fun for a kid like me to run around with the other kids, and really had a wonderful time. It was the kind of joy that you have when you feel like you had escaped death, and then now you're given a second chance. And so we were all very happy. The government gave us, I don't know if it's the government or the camp people there who was running the camp, gave us 3 Singaporean dollars a day to buy food to eat. So each person got $3. And I remember there was a small shop, store that sold rice and different things. So we were able to cook for ourselves. I would go over to the next, my gang and I found a little hole in the fence of the camp, and we snuck out to the farm next door, and we would dig up sweet potatoes and different things to bring back to give to our moms to cook. And one day on the loudspeaker, people said, "Do not let your children go to the next door neighbor or else they will shoot you." Shoot them. So that was the end of that. But we were able to leave the camp and go out into Singapore and see the city. So that was really wonderful. We saw people who used to work for us in Vietnam who moved, resettled in Singapore. So they showed us around the country and we loved it, being able to see the country and to see our friends again. One sad story that is difficult for me to tell, but it's important for people to understand in the context of refugees and what happens to them, is when we're at a place like that, especially children and women, we're at the mercy of whatever that is available to us, given to us at the camp. There were so many people there living together. Basically, we were out in the open. There wasn't like house that we lived in. We were given a small cot for each person, like a fishing, like when you go fishing, a little cot, and we just slept on that. Luckily, we found next to a building, there was a cover, so we slept under that on the cot. But we were all basically living together, hundreds, maybe 1,000 people just out living together. So you can imagine, it's difficult to protect everyone. And so, and then there were people who were sent there, whether by their organization, like the Catholic Relief Organization, or different NGOs to support the refugees. So one of those people was a medical doctor who was sent there to take care of, or to examine the people and to work with them. And I remember that doctor very clearly. He's an older man, and the children were molested by him, including myself. He touched us in the way that at 9 years old I was very afraid. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any notion at that time of what was happening. And so I felt really awful. So I do want to share that this is what happens in a refugee camp, that things like that happen and children have no way of protecting themselves. They were already victims in a war. They're already a victim from where they come from, and they're trying to survive, and they're trying to find on a journey to freedom. And there are predators out there that prey on children and women and people out there. So it's one of the horrors of being a refugee at that time. So then after 3 months, we were sponsored by an American church in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to relocate and join the rest of our family who came before us in 1975, 1977, 1978, and our group was 1979. So we went there to reunite with them, and a church called Church of the Apostles, they sponsored us, and a nice family from that church were our sponsor family, which means they helped us to get resettled, driving us to do paperwork, helping us to buy essential things that we need to get started, because we really didn't know anything at all. So we resettled in December 1979, 3 days before Christmas. And I remember it was so cold when we arrived there, and we're from Saigon, which is almost on the equator, and it's hot year-round. And we arrived in this place that was bitterly cold, and we were excited for about 2 minutes before we hated it because it was too cold. But we were still thrilled to be in a new home. We're here in America after a long, long journey to get there. The following few days were a bit shocking to us. We saw that we ended up in almost a village, a small town that, really was so small and full of Amish people who were still riding horse and buggies and didn't believe in electricity. And then who lived outside of the city, and we were in the city. But in the city, it was such a small town, kind of, industrial, kind of redneck kind of place, that we were quite surprised and maybe also disappointed that this isn't the America that we envisioned in our mind when we lived in Vietnam and made the long journey for. Because when you are in another country, your perspective of America is what you see on television, of Hollywood and of Dallas and of places that you see on in American movies. So we were quite shocked, and my mother, the way in which we left, leaving everything behind. We were quite well off as a family in Vietnam. My mother built an important film and camera business, so we were well off, and we had to leave everything. So including our father also stayed in Vietnam. So when we ended up in a small town in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, with mom and 12 kids that were teenagers and younger. So I think my eldest sister at that time was maybe 20, and the rest were little kids. My mother became quite depressed. We didn't have money, we didn't have anything. We didn't know the language, we didn't know the culture, we didn't know what to do. So my mother really became sort of isolated, just distant from us. And we basically had to figure out life on our own. Not knowing the language was a big issue for us, even though we started to learn English a little bit in Vietnam because my mother had money and she sent us to school to learn English. Our broken sort of Vietnamese English is very different from English in a school or in society in America. So there was a lot of racism in a small town like that in America that we had to deal with. Aside from the Amish, the other races that were there were sort of a mix of sort of white, so white people, Hispanics, some African Americans. So it was a typical small town that didn't really understand or appreciate the influx of all these Vietnamese refugees. They saw us as outsiders who came in and are strange and different and people who they didn't think belong in this community. So we had such a hard time. The first couple of years, we just kept to ourselves. We try to figure out even how to cook different things. There was no real ingredients that we recognized at the supermarket. And we would, substitute soy sauce, for nước mắm. We would just try to invent different things to eat. The host family, the sponsor family, tried to help us, but it was very difficult for them also because they didn't really understand us culturally either. So we managed to just figure out how to do different things. I went to ESL classes at school. And there I really got to know some other Vietnamese. And, you know, at least in the ESL class, I was able to, I felt more understood because there were people there who were similar to me. And then my older brothers and sisters had to go to work. You know, after school, my older brother, who at that time was maybe 17 years old, 16, 17, he went to work as a janitor at a school, after school, mopping floors and things like that, which was really very sad for my mother and for us, because when we were in Vietnam, we had many people working for us as maids in our own house and drivers for us. But my brother had to go and be a janitor after school. And then after that, he, on the weekends, would go to Goodwill and buy clothes. Just big bags of clothes, just things he just grabbed and bring home and give that to us to wear. I remember just our clothes are either too big or too small, you know, it just never really fit. And then we also had like a system of handing things down because there was, you know, we always had to keep on using what we have. We also really coped by everybody working. We, on the weekend, would go to the Green Dragon Amish market, which is a big kind of farmer's market thing. They had a big indoor building as well as some outdoor booths that people from Lidditz, Pennsylvania would bring you know, things they grow to sell there, or food and that they make, or arts and crafts, and, you know, all sorts of things. It's like a big thing every weekend. So we used to make egg rolls and we used to make fried rice. So on the, you know, on Friday after school, we would all be rolling egg rolls. Saturday early morning, we would all go out there and sell egg rolls for $1 each. So we used to do that to earn money. We would participate in kind of fall and different summer, fall festivals at various libraries and schools around Lancaster. So we would, you know, go in, you know, imagine a sort of the fall harvest festival at Lancaster, you know, Public Library. And my family would go in there with our egg rolls and would sell. So we were known to be the egg roll people and sell in there. And that was really a time in which we bonded as a family. We just had to survive. And you know, my brothers, there's a famous line in my family where one time my brother had a big box of egg rolls that he was delivering to the library, and he had to do it on his bicycle, and on the way he dropped it. So from then on we said, don't drop the egg rolls. So that's the line that we tell each other to remind each other of that time and how far we've come since that time when we had to mop floors and to sell egg rolls to survive. We were on food stamp and on welfare when we first came as well, and that was also really difficult for my mother, who was always a self-made woman who, with 12 kids, having 12 kids in Vietnam, she built a business empire that made her, you know, a wealthy woman in Vietnam. But when we came to America, we were on welfare, and we became nobodies. And the way in which we ended up coping with all of that was through a few things. One is having each other. You know, I think the blessing of having a big family is you can rely on each other and you can lean on one another. So we always knew that we were strong because we had each other. For example, we used to be bullied all the time, and there was on the school bus, there was segregation just by the children. They segregated themselves. So the whites were in the front, the Hispanics in the middle, and the Vietnamese in the back of the bus. But there would always be fights amongst the races. And we ended up having to take umbrellas to school to defend ourselves on the bus. We would actually have fights on the bus where the bus driver would pull over and separate us and all of that. That was my first time where I really experienced racism and experienced, you know, what it means to be different and what America truly is. So to cope, we had each other to protect each other. The second way of coping was really having friends and people in the community who were there for us, like our sponsor family, the Johnsons, I still remember their names, and the Freemans from the Church of the Apostles. They really just through their own faith and belief in God that gave them this kindness to give back, which is a wonderful character and wonderful value that I learned about the American people. Because in Vietnam, the notion of volunteering and just sort of helping your neighbors in that way, it's not as organized. People help each other, but not like organized in that way. And then I had personal friends who helped me through, like my friend Nina Hogan, who was in 7th grade with me, and her mother is half Greek, and her father, actually her mother is full Greek and her father was full American, so she's also a mixed race, she's a mixed race person, and but you know, the Greek side of her was like us, they're immigrants in America, so we really became friends at that time, and she really helped me through teaching me, you know, how to be American, you know, even though I was embarrassed and felt awkward most of the time. You know, I just felt like I didn't know anything, and I pretended most of the time, just pretended I knew something when I really didn't. Like food, music, culture, all of those things. You know, I would nod my head quite a bit, you know, often when people say things, but then later I have to go and, you know, try to figure out what they mean. And at that time, there wasn't the internet or anything, so I just had to, you know, ask people or go to the library and look things up. Because not knowing is very shameful, especially as a kid, where you feel even more outcasted when you feel ignorant about things, you know, and then you just feel like you're an intruder or an outsider that don't belong. So I was very grateful for my friend Nina to, you know, hold my hands through the early parts of my life in Pennsylvania. We're still friends, like we're still best friends today, and we helped each other throughout our lives. And then spirituality and faith also helped us cope. Whether it's through so there was a Vietnamese church in our community, and that church really was the place that many people went to for help, just to, you know, feel like that's a place where you can belong, a safe place where you can be who you are. And of course, the teachings of the Bible at that time, we didn't have anything to hang on to, so that was very appealing to refugees. Just the message of redemption, the message of hope in the future was very, and also of kindness to one another. Love your neighbor as yourself. People were just kind and understanding in church. And then, of course, there's Buddhist temples in the area also that the Vietnamese community set up. And many people went to either the temple or the church. And we all kind of felt that that was a place that we belong. And so our family went to the Vietnamese church. And, I was in the youth group. I studied the Bible. I did everything that young people did. Went camping with the church, and at the same time, I really was so open to learning about America that at that time, other religions had missionaries who went around and knocked on people's doors, and so we had the Jehovah's Witnesses come and knocked on our doors. So I studied the Bible with them too. And then the Mormons came, and so I was like, okay, everybody come in and we'll all study the Bible together. So I was just a kid. I was just 12 or 13, and I just studied the Bible with everybody. It was very funny. But it was, I think, in hindsight, it was just people's kindness that was appealing to me, that I was bullied at school. I didn't feel accepted in the world, in society. And so anyone who came and extended a message of peace, of compassion, of empathy, I just we welcomed them. It was really an interesting time for us. And the community was there for each other. Lancaster had a small Vietnamese community. So in 1975, America resettled refugees in different major pockets in America, like California, so Southern California, Texas, Mississippi, and then a place called Gap, Pennsylvania. So there were many refugees that ended up there, and then later in Philadelphia, and then sort of in that Pennsylvania, Lancaster area. So over time, grocery stores were opened. So the community sort of figured out how to support each other. On the weekends, we would go to a Vietnamese dance party. So every weekend, we would rent a big kind of hall at a rec center, and the people would organize like a new wave dance party or 80s dance party. And so we would just go. I was just a young teen, but that was the best time because that was the only place where we can sort of have to remember who we are as Vietnamese, that we can be ourselves and have fun, not in a church kind of setting, but kind of like just normal fun, teens, drinking beer. There were a lot of beer drinking, and flirting with each other as kids, dancing and hanging out, because we didn't know how to hang out with Americans, at that time. So it was all Vietnamese hanging out with each other. So that really helped us cope as well as the community, and to enjoy our time, our life there, because the normal daily life is tough. It was very tough for us. So I had referenced bullying in school. That was a tough thing for Vietnamese, for me in particular. You know, I was just awkward. I felt awkward all the time, and you know, even though I just had it in me to work very hard, I was different. So a very vivid memory of being bullied was when I was in 7th grade. These kids made fun of me so much that one day they grabbed me, like I was walking and I didn't know, but I felt hands grabbing me, and then they carried me to the outside of the school and put me upside down in one of those big trash cans. So that was really a horrible moment, a horrible time for me. That I would say is part of being a refugee, part of being misunderstood, part of just not really belong, but also just feeling like, you know, that's what kids do to each other, being mean to each other. But for me, I was really embarrassed more than angry. I was really embarrassed, really humiliated. But what that did to me was that it motivated me to be better than those guys, those people. So it motivated me to work harder, to strive for success in myself, to just go and basically succeed at no cost, just do what I can to be successful in life. So maybe thanks to them that I became successful, but that was really a horrific experience. And I bring that up to say, you know, refugees really have a hard time in this country. It's a free country. It's a country that offers many opportunities, but the first 10 years, it's really rough. And, you know, so much so that I think it's still buried deep inside of me, some of the traumas. I would call that a traumatic experience, as well as, you know, being molested at the refugee camp. Those traumatic experiences, you know, are bottled and compartmentalized inside of me, that I don't think about them, but once in a while something would trigger my memory. One of those triggers would be like when I see refugees from other countries like Ukraine or the Gaza, the Middle East, or just Afghanistan in recent years. I would just watch something on TV and see children, refugees, and I would just automatically cry, just because it brings back those memories of my own experiences. And I think that's probably why Vietnamese refugees really, you know, when the Afghan refugees came over here, there were many Vietnamese refugees trying to help them because they saw a lot of similarities, and they knew what those refugees were going through, including myself, trying to help them. I helped in our local community to help those refugees. And then we try to preserve our, so moving on, trying to preserve our culture through music, through our holidays. So whenever there's Tết, we would you know, do what we can to recreate the atmosphere of Tết at home. Like we would use the ribbons or, you know, craft papers to make flowers and the hoa mai blossoms that we use in Vietnam. So we would go outside and get a dried tree branch, and then we make these yellow flowers from paper, and then we would, glue them onto the branches, and that was our fake hoa mai blossoms. And then we would, pray, and we would make food that, it's traditional to Vietnamese culture, and we would eat that together and wish each other, and, in a way, trying to preserve that culture for ourselves, to make ourselves feel happy, but also knowing that we needed to do this for our community and for our family, that we can pass down to future generations. And then I think as I got older, I became more and more integrated into the American culture, because you needed to integrate in order to be successful. You need to become more of your new country and less of yourself in order to be the successful person in this new place. So I became very much Americanized, and less of our culture is preserved within me. I began to lose my language, my Vietnamese language. And rightly so. At that time, when I came over at age 9, even my Vietnamese was quite limited at the 3rd grade or 4th grade. That later, just speaking English, learning everything in English, we just my whole family and myself included just became American and spoke mostly in English, and so culturally wise, we also became more American. In the early days, we would use a duck to make Thanksgiving, but later we actually use a turkey for Thanksgiving dinner. We observed more American holidays and American celebrations than Vietnamese. Then I went off to college, and that was all American because I went to a school in Washington, D.C. called George Washington University, and with many Americans, or quite diverse, but predominantly American. But to my surprise, there was a Vietnamese Student Association at GW at that time, and this is 1994, something like that. It's quite early days. No, I graduated in 1994, so it's 30 years ago that I graduated from college. So I saw there was a Vietnamese Student Association, so I was very ambitious. Remember, I was going through so much trauma that I decided to be ambitious. I'm just going to, rule the world. So then I ran for president of the Vietnamese Student Association, and then I became president of VSA, and then I organized many events and all of that to help people understand about U.S.-Vietnam relations. I was studying international relations at the time, and then we organized dance parties, just like the old days in Lancaster. We would have dance parties for university students, and did many fun things as a community. And that was really a beautiful time to allow me to have one foot in the door that's connected to my Vietnamese-ness, and then the other foot being totally American. My siblings did the same kind of thing. They went to college and they became Americanized, but depending on their age when they came to America. Some stayed within the community to, more to remain in the culture more than others. So the younger you were that you came over, the more Americanized you became and less of Vietnamese. Then really the longer time passed, the farther Vietnam became to me. And I graduated from college, and then I had a chance as soon as I graduated to go to Vietnam. So after graduating from George Washington University, I had the opportunity to travel to Vietnam for the first time since leaving as a refugee in 1979. At that time, I didn't know what to expect to come back. I was full of emotions. I felt like this was my country that I'm going back to. When we landed in Saigon, I was emotional, but also felt a bit detached to my country. I felt like I was more American than Vietnamese. There were sounds that were familiar to me, like the sounds of motorbikes and the sound of people living. But other than that, I didn't really connect with my roots again. I saw my father, and that was very emotional to see him again. We were there, my friends and I went, and so we were there for 5 weeks in Vietnam. And during the time I was in Vietnam, I received a letter from the U.S. Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C., offering me my first job from college. So I became an international trade specialist for the U.S. Department of Commerce. And I was just a little kid, just graduated from school. So I was really happy. And it just, I never really understood the complexity of how I was feeling at that time. I couldn't process that feeling of being Vietnamese, but being American. I didn't understand my identity. Because at that time, being 22 years old, I thought I had to be one or the other. I didn't realize that I could be both, and that people at that time in Vietnam were looking at me also as a Vietnamese, but not really a Vietnamese. So I think I was just confused about who I was. And maybe I felt it was easier to be American than being Vietnamese, because that would have required me to invest a lot of myself back into being Vietnamese, and I wasn't ready for that. So then I went back to America and built my career. I just worked for the Department of Commerce. I worked for the U.S. Telecommunications Association. I worked for Iridium, which is a mobile satellite company. And it was through those jobs that actually I went back to Vietnam. Those companies, those organizations saw the value of being Vietnamese and American in their company. So the Telecom Industry Association allowed me to organize a trade mission of U.S. telecommunications companies to Vietnam. And that was the first delegation that went to Vietnam since after the war. So it was high profile, and I was only 23 or 24 and really didn't know much about Vietnam, but I was organizing a group of maybe about 20 big US company representatives to Vietnam for this trade mission. And then when I was at Iridium, I also was hired to help Iridium, the company, obtain an operating license in Vietnam. So I was only 25 years old, and I was here in Washington and traveled to Vietnam every 5 weeks to work with the Vietnamese government and the partners to try and get a license. So that was really my time for me to get reconnected with my roots. However, I still wasn't accepting that I wasn't accepting my Vietnamese side. Even though I traveled there quite often, I was still a visitor. I was still coming there to accomplish a mission for the American company I was working for. I wasn't there and integrating myself back into being Vietnamese. I spoke with people as if I'm a visitor. I really just felt like I was born Vietnamese, but not really Vietnamese. Very strange at that time, and maybe I was still confused. And then later on, I had this opportunity to attend an art exhibition. It was the first Vietnamese fine art exhibition that was traveling around America. And at that time, I think it was the 10-year anniversary of US-Vietnam relations, normalized relations. So the art exhibition was very meaningful, it was even before that. It was just soon after. This was in 2000. This was in 1990. Maybe it was 1998. So it was early days. It was before. It was maybe only 5 years after normalized relations. So this exhibition of the most famous Vietnamese artists, modern artists, travel around the U.S. And the exhibition started in Washington, D.C. I went to that exhibition, and I was really moved by the exhibition because, art and culture speak to people in a way that politics and commerce cannot. The heartbeat of society, a heartbeat of the humanities is about their culture. It's about their heritage. And I was really moved by what I saw, just beautiful paintings and sculptures. And so it was at that moment that I was moved. And I also, as a side note, I met my husband. I saw my husband's photograph at that time, and that's how we got together and got married. But what was impactful about that was he's an American man from Boulder, Colorado, and he had moved to Vietnam in 1993 and had been photographing this country. And his photograph was in the exhibition, and he's the only American that was in the exhibition. Everyone else was Vietnamese. So I was really impressed by him. I didn't know who he was, so it wasn't like, I fell in love with somebody I didn't know. I was moved by his work and by who he was. And then, I was, after that exhibition was when I started searching my identity. I started to search and be content, trying to be content about who I am, and realize that, you know, being Vietnamese was actually a good thing, that it was part of a heritage and a culture that is very meaningful and very, very significant. The beauty, the history, the way the Vietnamese look at the future, full of hope and optimism, is something that I saw myself to be a part of. That I saw that it was okay to be it was cool, it was good to be a part of that. That I don't need to forfeit that anymore. I don't need to push that aside and be ashamed of being Vietnamese because of the refugee days. That now being Vietnamese through this exhibition was that it is something that can help me become stronger and not weaker. So it was really at that time that really changed me. And so then I later on in 2002 was hired to be country manager for New York Life in Vietnam. So I managed our offices in Saigon and in Hanoi. And I really jumped at that opportunity because I felt like this is the way for me to really rediscover myself, rediscover who I am. And with all of my ambitions, I can do something at this point to give back to Vietnam, but also to, you know, to be successful in my career. So I went to Vietnam with Peter. We were married by that time, and I had a daughter. She was 1.5 at that time. You know, being there with Peter, being there in Vietnam, and having come from Washington, D.C., Peter and I made a commitment at that time that in 2002 that we would one day open an organization that can promote the better understanding and appreciation for Vietnam, the Vietnamese people, our history, our heritage, our culture, and to reconnect, help people to reconnect with each other. So we said we're going to build this organization to do that. We wanted to change the narrative and the perspective that Vietnam is a place of war to Vietnam is a heritage that is thousands of years old, and that it is the third oldest country in the world. So we wanted to change that narrative in the mindset of the public, American public of the world, but also of our own people, of overseas Vietnamese. And you know, it's part of me being proud of being Vietnamese that drove me to that. And of course, I have to thank my husband for opening my eyes to that too. Seeing an American appreciating and loving my country and my culture so much more than me and many Vietnamese Americans at that time. So anyhow, fast forward to 20 years later, in 2021, we started an organization called Vietnam Society, and with the mission of exactly what I said, to increase understanding and appreciation for Vietnam in America and around the world, and to help build bridges to connect people to each other, the people of Vietnam to America and people of Vietnam to the world. And really focusing on the beauty and the history of our culture and our people, period. Not at all about anything related to government, politics. Business is going to continue to thrive between the two countries, and that can help spur, the investments behind culture and art as well, film industry, book industry, etc. But we wanted people to really know the true Vietnam and the true Vietnamese people at the heart of who we are. And so we started that in Washington, D.C., because this is the nation's capital, and this is where a lot of attention is given to a foreign culture. So we decided to do programmings here that can really amplify and show our culture with partners that are very important partners that have the network, the resources, and the ability to help us do that. So we partner with organizations like the Smithsonian, the Kennedy Center, the Martin Luther King Library, the U.S. Institute of Peace, the Daughters of American Revolution Museum, etc. We would just work with anybody who can help us. Vietnam has a special place in the American psyche, society, and heart. The war itself was so traumatizing for Americans that it's still, people still have such a connection to Vietnam. And whether it's the war or anything else, just Vietnam has a brand in America. So when we go to these organizations, they have been open and willing to partner with us because we're bringing content to them that's not available anywhere else in America. So we've been very successful in working with them. We organize an annual event called Vietnam Week, which showcases different aspects of Vietnamese cultures related to fine art, performing art, literature, film, and cuisine throughout the whole city for a whole week every autumn in DC. And we do that because we want people to be reminded that every fall there's a Vietnam festival, there's Vietnam Week. And that's the kind of a way in which we can show consistently, and training people to think of Vietnam every fall. And that thinking actually came from my experience with Japan. When I was in high school, I actually went to Japan as a foreign exchange student for 1 year. And so I learned Japanese and came back and really got involved in a lot of Japanese organizations in Washington. And I learned about how Japan, actually, the model of Japan changing the hearts and minds of America after World War II. When, at that time, the Japanese were vilified, they were the enemy of America. They were the enemies of the world. They were aggressive and all of that. But Japan's society was created to help change that perception. And after a long while, they used art and culture as the basis for changing American hearts and minds, that today, when we think of Japan, we no longer think of the aggressive warmonger. We think of Japan as Zen and, beauty and peace and kimonos and manga and sushi and anime. So it's really using art and culture very effectively to change mindset. And that's why we are doing a similar kind of, pathway. and just by the way, I went to meet with the president of Japan Society in New York 2 weeks ago to really learn more from them and to tell them about us, and also to tell them that in fact Vietnam and Japan has a very long bilateral history as well. In the 15th and 16th century, Japan actually came to Vietnam in the kind of the Hoi An, Da Nang area, and there were many Japanese merchants who came there and resettled there. So, so we will be collaborating with Japan Society on, and in the future as well. So Vietnam Society is the way in which we want the world to change its perspective on Vietnam, but more than that, we see the way the two countries are interlinked from the time of the war 50 years ago until now and into the future. That it's the two countries that will continue to have many shared interests in security matters, in political matters, in commercial matters, in humanities and society. There's so many things about the two countries that will forever be linked. And therefore, we want the two people to reconnect as well. And when I say the two people, I'm talking about the American public and the Vietnamese, but also overseas Vietnamese being the third component of that they need to reconnect with their roots, and in particular the younger generation and the future generation, because in Vietnam today, most of the people were born after the war, and most of the people have such incredible bright ideas for making Vietnam into the great power that it should be, and it has the potential, it has the foundation and all of the things needed to do that. So the future is in the hands of young people for our country. And so, I in my late years, I want to do something that can build that legacy to bring that platform and that pathway for those young people to take what we have built and move that forward in a much, much better way. But it's not easy because we still haven't reconciled with each other. The war is still fresh and alive in the minds of Vietnamese Americans, of overseas Vietnamese. They are still bitter and angry and traumatized by the war. And that trauma is passed down in the intergenerations, from the parents down. And then on the Vietnam side, the current Vietnamese government have also disconnected itself from what happened right after the war, and its relationship with the overseas Vietnamese, particularly those who were part of the war. And so there's that very dark side of their relationship that it's still very much a part of the trauma that's lived by the overseas Vietnamese and then not recognized by the Vietnamese government. And therefore, both sides have not come to the table, have not reconciled. And so when we're talking about older people who lived through the war and are unable to reconcile, the younger generation aren't able to reconnect with each other, reconnect, and find a pathway in which they can they work together and be a part of the future of Vietnam. So for me, Vietnam society stands at an important place in Vietnamese history and Vietnamese history today and in the future, where we are creating a pathway, we're creating a way for those who want to reconnect with each other. We want to build that bridge, but that it is a bridge based on how we acknowledge the past in a way that's respectful to the past, but also a way for the people of today to be able to say, you know, we want to be a part of this country. We want to be a part of our heritage and our culture. And to do that, we have to start at the very basic level of just talking to each other, acknowledging each other's experiences and pains and what we went through. And then from that, allowing people to visit Vietnam, visit each other and experiencing their culture. And then after that, hopefully being able to, find commonalities in which they are able to build together. So the role of art and culture right now with Vietnam society is just the beginning for us. We chose art and culture so that it is the safe place for everybody to come and to be able to talk to each other. But in the future, Vietnam society might expand into other areas that would allow people to really collaborate and really connect at different levels so that we can make the world, really the world, a better place. That's it.